Rohan sat under the old bridge, his back resting against the cold concrete pillar as the city buzzed above him. Cars honked, people rushed to work, and life moved on, completely unaware of his existence. The sun was high, but the warmth did little to ease the hunger gnawing at his stomach. He had gone without food since yesterday, but hunger was nothing new. As he watched the busy street, a sleek black car sped past, its tires screeching as the driver lost control. The vehicle swerved violently, crashed through the bridge railing, and dangled precariously over the river below. Pedestrians screamed and backed away, afraid the car might plunge into the water at any moment. Without thinking, Rohan sprinted toward the wreckage. His bare feet burned against the hot pavement, but he didn't stop. The driver, a well-dressed man in his late 50s, was trapped inside, struggling to unlock the jammed door. Smoke curled from the engine, time was running out. Rohan climbed onto the crumbling edge of the bridge, gripping the door handle with all his strength. "Push from the inside," he yelled. The man, his face pale with fear, obeyed, and with one final yank, the door flung open. Rohan grabbed the man's arm and pulled with all his might. Just as the front of the car tipped forward, both of them tumbled onto the pavement, safe. The man gasped for air, staring at Rohan with wide eyes. You saved my life." Before Rohan could reply, security guards and paramedics rushed in, pulling the man away while onlookers gathered. A woman pointed at Rohan. "That boy saved him. Someone give him a reward." But Rohan knew better. He had seen how people like him were treated. Before anyone could change their mind, he turned and ran, disappearing into the alleyways. The next day, as he sat in his usual spot beneath the bridge, a line of expensive cars rolled to a stop nearby. The same man he had saved stepped out, now surrounded by bodyguards. Rohan tensed, ready to run, but the man smiled. "I've been looking for you," the man said. "Come with me." Rohan hesitated. "Why?" The man extended his hand. "Because someone who risks everything for a stranger deserves more than just survival." For the first time in years, Rohan reached out, and took the chance that as Rohan hesitated, his mind raced with doubts. Was this some kind of trick? Would the man hand him over to the police for trespassing or accuse him of something he didn't do? But something in the man's eyes, genuine gratitude, maybe even admiration, made Rohan take a deep breath and step forward. The man led him to a luxurious car, its leather seats feeling strange against Rohan's rough, dirt-covered hands. As they drove through the city, Rohan kept glancing at the tinted windows, wondering if this was all a dream. The buildings outside grew taller, cleaner, richer. They arrived at a massive estate, the kind Rohan had only seen from a distance. The man, who introduced himself as Aditya Mehra, a billionaire businessman, gestured for him to follow. Inside, the mansion was overwhelming, gleaming floors, chandeliers, a scent of something expensive lingering in the air. A maid looked at Rohan with surprise, but Aditya simply said, "Bring him something to eat." Moments later, a feast was placed in front of Rohan. He hesitated, unsure if it was really meant for him. Aditya chuckled. "Go ahead, eat." Rohan didn't need to be told twice. He devoured the food, every bite reminding him of what he had missed all these years. After the meal, Aditya sat across from him. "Tell me about yourself." Rohan hesitated. He wasn't used to people caring. "Not much to tell. Been on my own for years." Aditya nodded. "And yet, you risked your life for a stranger." Rohan shrugged. "Did what I had to." Aditya studied him for a moment before smiling. "How would you like a fresh start?" Rohan frowned. "What do you mean?" "A place to stay. Education. A future." Rohan's heart pounded. Was this real? People didn't just offer things like this, especially to kids like him. "Why would you do that for me?" Aditya leaned back. Because once, someone gave me a second chance when I needed it most. And now, I'd like to do the same for you. For the first time in years, Rohan felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Rohan's fingers tightened around the edge of his chair. His whole life, he had been let down by promises, empty words from strangers who either pitied him or feared him. But Aditya Mehra was different. He wasn't offering charity. He wasn't looking at Rohan with pity. He saw something else in him. Still, doubt lingered. What if I mess up? Rohan asked, his voice quieter than before. Aditya smiled. Then you'll learn. Everyone makes mistakes, Rohan. What matters is having the chance to do better. The words settled deep within Rohan. He had always fought for survival, but no one had ever told him he had a right to a future. Aditya led him through the mansion, showing him a guest room, bigger than any space Rohan had ever called home. This is yours, for as long as you need. Rohan stepped inside, unsure of how to react. The bed looked too soft, the air too fresh. He turned back. What do I have to do in return? Aditya chuckled. You don't owe me anything. But if you want, I can help you get into school, teach you a few things. The choice is yours. Rohan stared at him, trying to find the catch. But for once, there wasn't one. That night, Rohan lay in bed, unable to sleep. He was used to the hard pavement, to the distant hum of traffic, not the silence of a home. He was terrified that if he closed his eyes, he'd wake up back under the bridge. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of breakfast. He followed the scent to the dining area, where Aditya sat, reading the newspaper. Hungry? Rohan hesitated before nodding. As he ate, Aditya placed a file in front of him. I've already spoken to a few schools. If you're willing, you can start classes next week. Rohan swallowed his food slowly. School? Yes. I know it'll be new for you, but you're smart, Rohan. You just need an opportunity. Rohan didn't know what to say. He had never imagined sitting in a classroom, writing in notebooks instead of scribbling on scraps of newspapers. But the thought of learning, of becoming something more than a boy on the streets, stirred something inside him. He met Aditya's gaze. Okay. I'll try. Aditya smiled. That's all I ask. Days turned into weeks. Rohan started school, struggling at first but pushing through. Aditya hired a tutor to help him catch up, and for the first time, Rohan had something to wake up for besides just surviving. Months later, one evening, Aditya handed him a piece of paper. It was a legal document. Rohan looked up, confused. What's this? Aditya exhaled. I've been thinking about this for a while. If you're ready, I'd like to adopt you. Rohan's world stopped. No one had ever wanted him before. His voice wavered. Why? Aditya's expression was warm. Because family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to stand by you. Tears burned Rohan's eyes, but he blinked them away. Slowly, he picked up the pen. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He belonged. Rohan stared at the paper in front of him. His hands trembled as he held the pen, hesitating. The thought of having a family, a real family, felt foreign, almost too good to be true. His entire life, he had been alone. The streets had been his only home, and trust was a currency he couldn't afford to spend. But Aditya had never treated him like a stray or a charity case. He had given Rohan choices, not commands. And now, he was offering something Rohan had never dared to dream of, a place to belong. Rohan swallowed hard. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Aditya smiled. More than anything. Taking a deep breath, Rohan put the pen to paper and signed his name. The moment the ink dried, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just Rohan, the homeless kid under the bridge anymore. He was Rohan Mehra. Aditya clapped a hand on his shoulder. Welcome home, son. The word hit Rohan like a wave. Son. No one had ever called him that before. His chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, he wrapped his arms around Aditya. The man didn't hesitate, he pulled Rohan close, holding him as if he had always belonged there. Months later. Rohan adjusted his school tie, still not used to how it felt around his neck. He looked at himself in the mirror, standing in a room that was his, filled with books, posters, and things he never thought he'd own. He had struggled at first. Sitting in a classroom, learning things kids his age had known for years, had been frustrating. But he worked harder than anyone. He studied late into the night, determined to make Aditya proud. And today, as he walked down the school hallways, people saw him differently. Not as a street kid, not as an outsider, but as someone with a future. After school, Aditya was waiting for him outside, leaning against his car with a knowing smile. How was your day? He asked as Rohan climbed in. Rohan grinned. Good. Aditya nodded. I have something to show you. They drove across the city until they reached a familiar place, the old bridge. Rohan's heart clenched at the sight. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had been sitting under it, invisible to the world. Aditya pointed to a signpost near the bridge. Go take a look. Rohan stepped closer, and his breath caught in his throat. A plaque had been placed there, gleaming in the sunlight. It read, in honor of Rohan Mehra, who risked everything to save a life. A reminder that true heroes come from the unlikeliest places. Tears welled in Rohan's eyes. He had been nameless for so long, just another kid lost in the streets. But now, his name, was here for the world to see. He turned to Aditya, emotions swirling inside him. I don't know how to thank you. Aditya smiled. You already have. Rohan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past finally lift. He wasn't just a boy under a bridge anymore. He was someone who mattered. Someone who had a home, a father, and a future. And for the first time, he truly believed it, the city had changed, or maybe Rohan saw it differently now. The once intimidating skyline now felt familiar, like a place he belonged. He stood outside the towering glass building, taking a deep breath before stepping through the doors. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. Good morning, Mr. Mehra. It still felt strange to hear that. He had spent years proving to himself that he was more than just the boy under the bridge, and now, he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. Rohan had worked hard, pushing himself through school, college, and now, his first day working alongside Aditya Mehra. Not just as his son, but as his right hand in the business empire Aditya had built. Walking into his father's office, he found Aditya standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned, smiling. First day as an official businessman. How does it feel? Rohan smirked. A lot less terrifying than my first day of school. Aditya chuckled. You've come a long way, son. And I couldn't be prouder. Rohan's chest swelled with emotion. I wouldn't be here without you. Aditya pointed to a signpost near the bridge. Go take a look. Rohan stepped closer, and his breath caught in his throat. A plaque had been placed there, gleaming in the sunlight. It read, in honor of Rohan Mehra, who risked everything to save a life. A reminder that true heroes come from the unlikeliest places. Tears welled in Rohan's eyes. He had been nameless for so long, just another kid lost in the streets. But now, his name, was here for the world to see. He turned to Aditya, emotions swirling inside him. I don't know how to thank you. Aditya smiled. You already have. Rohan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past finally lift. He wasn't just a boy under a bridge anymore. He was someone who mattered. Someone who had a home, a father, and a future. And for the first time, he truly believed it. The city had changed, or maybe Rohan saw it differently now. The once intimidating skyline now felt familiar, like a place he belonged. He stood outside the towering glass building, taking a deep breath before stepping through the doors. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Mehra." It still felt strange to hear that. He had spent years proving to himself that he was more than just the boy under the bridge, and now, he was stepping into a new chapter of his life. Rohan had worked hard, pushing himself through school, college, and now, his first day working alongside Aditya Mehra. Not just as his son, but as his right hand in the business empire Aditya had built. Walking into his father's office, he found Aditya standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned, smiling. "First day as an official businessman. How does it feel?" Rohan smirked. "A lot less terrifying than my first day of school." Aditya chuckled. "You've come a long way, son. And I couldn't be prouder." Rohan's chest swelled with emotion. "I wouldn't be here without you." Aditya shook his head. "No, Rohan. You wouldn't be here without yourself. I only opened a door. You walked through it." Rohan nodded, understanding now what Aditya had seen in him all those years ago. He had been more than a homeless boy under a bridge. He had always been more. He just needed someone to believe in him, and now, he wanted to do the same for others. Taking a deep breath, he pulled out a folder and placed it on Aditya's desk. "What's this?" Aditya asked, flipping it open. Rohan met his father's gaze. "A proposal. I want to start a foundation, for kids like me. The ones living on the streets, the ones everyone ignores. I want to give them the same chance you gave me." Aditya's eyes softened with pride. He closed the folder and nodded. "Let's do it." Years ago, Rohan had been invisible, forgotten by the world. But now, he was going to change it. For every kid still waiting under a bridge, he would be the hand reaching out, just like someone once did for him. Months passed, and Rohan's foundation, the Second Chance Initiative, became more than just an idea. It turned into a movement. With Aditya's support and his own determination, Rohan set up shelters, education programs, and career training for homeless and orphan children. He personally visited the streets, the slums, and the underpasses, places that once felt like home but now felt like a distant memory. He spoke to kids who looked at him with the same distrust he had once felt. But when he told them his story, their eyes lit up with something he knew all too well: hope. One evening, as he was walking near the old bridge, he spotted a boy, no older than 10, sitting on the same spot where he had once slept. The boy hugged his knees, his eyes darting around, ready to run at any moment. Rohan knelt beside him. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated before mumbling, "Aman." Rohan smiled. "Aman, how long have you been out here?" Aman shrugged. "A while." Rohan saw himself in the boy's cautious eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. "I used to be like you," he said. "Alone, scared, not knowing who to trust." Aman's eyes flickered with curiosity. "This?" Rohan continued, holding up the card. "This is a way out. A chance for something better. No tricks, no lies. Just an opportunity, if you're ready to take it." Aman stared at the card before hesitantly taking it. "You really used to be like me?" Rohan nodded. "I was you." The boy bit his lip, then whispered, "What happened?" Rohan looked up at the bridge, remembering the day his life had changed forever. He turned back to Aman, smiling. "Someone gave me a chance." Aman held onto the card like it was the most valuable thing he had ever owned. For the first time in years, Rohan realized something. He had once thought saving Aditya's life was the most important thing he had ever done. But now, he knew the truth: helping kids like Amon, giving them a future, was his real purpose. As he walked away, he glanced back one last time. Amon was still sitting there, staring at the card. And then, slowly, he stood up and followed. Amon took slow, hesitant steps behind Rohan, his small hands gripping the card tightly as if it would disappear if he let go. Rohan didn't turn around or pressure him. He knew the feeling all too well: hope was a terrifying thing when you weren't used to it. When they reached the Foundation's main center, Amon's eyes widened. It wasn't a cold, lifeless shelter like the ones he had been kicked out of before. It felt warm. Kids played in the courtyard, laughter filling the air. Some were doing homework under the watchful eye of a tutor, while others ate hot meals at a long table. Amon stopped at the entrance. I don't belong here," he mumbled, stepping back. Rohan turned to him, a smile breaking across his face. "I had a great teacher." As Amon stepped off the stage, the applause still roaring, Rohan knew this was only the beginning. For every child lost in the darkness, he would be the light. And just like Adifir had once done for him, he would continue reaching out his hand, one life at a time. The night of the gala ended with celebration, laughter, and a renewed sense of purpose. Rohan stood on the balcony, looking over the city that had once felt so unforgiving. The streets below had once been his home, a place of struggle and survival. Now, they were a reminder of why he did what he did. Amon walked up beside him, holding 2 glasses of juice. "You looked emotional back there," he teased, handing Rohan a glass. Rohan smirked. "I don't cry." Amon chuckled. "Sure. Must have been the lights making your eyes shine like that." They clinked glasses, standing in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Amon turned serious. "Rohan. I want to do more. Not just work at the Foundation, I want to help kids the way you helped me." Rohan looked at him with quiet pride. "You already are." Amon shook his head. "No, I mean really help. I want to be part of the decision-making, the expansion, everything. I know what it's like to be out there, just like you did. I want to make sure no kid ever feels as alone as we once did." Rohan exhaled, feeling something warm in his chest. He had spent years building this initiative, but seeing Amon step up made him realize something. This wasn't just his mission anymore. It was a movement. Rohan nodded. "Then let's do it together." The sign outside the brand new center gleamed under the sun. Mer Amon Foundation for Second Chances. Amon and Rohan stood side by side, watching as a group of kids ran into the facility, laughing and chattering excitedly. "This is just the beginning," Amon said, his voice filled with determination. Rohan smiled. "It always is." Behind them, Adifir stood with pride in his eyes. He had once given Rohan a second chance, and now, that single act of kindness had turned into a legacy. A legacy that would change lives for generations to come. Years passed, and the Mer Amon Foundation for Second Chances expanded beyond what Rohan had ever imagined. What started as a single shelter had now become a nationwide movement, reaching cities, towns, and even the most forgotten corners of the country. Schools, training centers, mentorship programs, all built to give homeless and underprivileged children a future. Rohan, now in his early 40s, stood before a packed auditorium, waiting to speak at a global summit on poverty in youth rehabilitation. It felt surreal. He had once been a nameless child on the streets, invisible to the world. Now, leaders, CEOs, and activists waited to hear his words. As he approached the microphone, he took a deep breath. "Years ago, I was just another kid under a bridge. Hungry, scared, alone. Society had already decided my fate, I was supposed to become just another statistic. But one man changed that. One man looked at me and saw something more than just a street kid. He gave me a second chance." He paused, scanning the crowd. "And because of that one act of kindness, thousands of children today are no longer sleeping on cold pavements. They are in classrooms, workplaces, and homes filled with love. They are artists, teachers, doctors, leaders. Because someone believed in them when no one else did. Applause thundered through the hall, but Rohan wasn't finished. This isn't just my story. It's a story of every child who just needed someone to say, "I see you." And if we, as a society, can become that hand reaching out, then we don't just change lives. We change the world. The standing ovation was overwhelming, but Rohan barely heard it. He only thought of the bridge where it all began, the place that had once defined his existence. Now, it was just a memory, a chapter in his journey. On a quiet afternoon, Rohan returned to the old bridge. It had been years since he had last walked these streets. The city had changed, and so had he. A plaque still stood near the bridge, bearing his name, the one Adifier had placed there all those years ago. He ran his fingers over it, feeling the weight of his past. "You made this possible," a familiar voice said. Rohan turned to see Aman, now a man in his 30s, standing beside him. Rohan smiled. "We made this possible." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as children played nearby, kids who now had a future because of the work they had done. As they turned to leave, Rohan looked up at the sky, whispering a silent thank you, to Adifier, to fate, to the moment that had set everything in motion. He had come full circle. But this was not the end. It was just another beginning. Rohan and Aman stood side by side, walking away from the bridge, their footsteps echoing through the streets they both once called home. It was hard to imagine the man he had become when he thought back to those days of despair and loneliness. Yet here he was, a symbol of hope not only for himself but for countless others. As they approached their car, Aman spoke up, breaking the quiet. "You know, I think we've come full circle. But there's still so much more to do." Rohan smiled. "Always more to do." Aman chuckled. "I guess that's the point, right? We keep going." Rohan looked over at him, the younger man now filled with a quiet confidence. "Exactly. The world needs us to keep going." The foundation was now so much more than a shelter or a program. It had become a movement that inspired others to create similar initiatives across the globe. As the foundation grew, Rohan and Aman also became mentors to a new generation of social entrepreneurs, helping them build their own projects to support underprivileged youth. The ripple effect continued to expand, reaching corners of the world Rohan had never imagined. In every city where their foundation was active, more kids had the chance to break free from the cycle of poverty. Some had gone on to become teachers, doctors, artists, and leaders. Some had returned to the foundation as mentors, passing on the same light they had received. It was the very thing Rohan had dreamed of all those years ago, the creation of a sustainable system of support that kept giving back. As they drove through the city, Rohan felt something in him shift again. It was no longer about survival, nor was it about just making a difference, it was about creating a legacy that would live on long after he was gone. And then, with a soft laugh, Rohan glanced at Aman. "You know, you were just a kid once, too. Now look at you." Aman grinned. "I guess you didn't mess me up too much." Rohan chuckled. "We both did all right, I think." They drove past the familiar streets, and Rohan looked at the horizon. There was no end to the journey, no final destination. The work would never truly be over, because there would always be children in need, always be lives to be changed. But as long as they were standing, as long as they had the strength to continue, Rohan and Aman would keep reaching out to pull others up, just as they had been pulled up. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better, because people like Rohan and Aman chose to make it so. And that, Rohan realized, was the greatest gift they could give. The years continued to pass, and the work of the Mera Aman Foundation expanded in ways Rohan never expected. New centers opened, community projects flourished, and Rohan's story became a beacon of possibility for countless young people across the world. But as the foundation grew, Rohan found himself stepping into a new role, one that felt as if it had been waiting for him all along. One quiet evening, in the heart of a bustling city, Rohan stood in the doorway of his office, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. It was Aman. "Hey, Rohan. Are you free tomorrow? We need to talk." Rohan could hear the seriousness in his voice. "Sure, what's going on? Can you meet me at the center? It's important." The next day, Rohan arrived at the foundation's main center, greeted by the sight of children running around and the familiar hum of activity. But when he entered the conference room, he was met by Aman, looking more serious than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about the future of the foundation," Aman began, his voice calm but deliberate. "And I've come to a decision." Rohan raised an eyebrow. "Okay, what's on your mind?" "I want to take over. I want to lead the foundation into its next chapter." Rohan blinked in surprise, his heart racing. "What are you talking about?" Aman smiled, but there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. "You've built this, Rohan. You've laid the foundation, pun intended, for everything we've accomplished. But the truth is, I'm ready to lead. I've spent years learning from you, and now I think it's my turn to take this to the next level." Rohan's mind raced. He had spent so many years driving the foundation forward, pouring every ounce of his energy into the cause. The thought of stepping back felt surreal. But as he looked at Aman, this young man who had once been like him, standing at the edge of a hopeless future, he knew deep down that it was time. "I'm not going anywhere," Rohan said softly. "I'll still be here. But if you feel like you're ready, then it's time for me to step aside." Aman's eyes softened, and he walked over to Rohan, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You've taught me everything I know. I'll carry on your legacy, Rohan. But I need your blessing to do it." Rohan took a deep breath. He looked around the room, the walls that had once been empty now filled with memories and the lives they had changed. He had built this from the ground up. It had always been his dream. But it was more than that now. It was a movement, a living, breathing thing that would outlast them both. With a small, contented smile, Rohan nodded. "You have my blessing. Go and make it yours." Aman took the reins of the foundation with the kind of leadership Rohan had always hoped for, steady, compassionate, and relentless. He continued to build upon the groundwork Rohan had laid, but with his own unique vision for the future. Rohan, while stepping back from the day-to-day operations, continued to mentor young leaders within the organization, passing on the lessons he had learned through years of struggle and success. He traveled the world, speaking at international conferences, inspiring even more people to take action in their own communities. But in his heart, Rohan knew the greatest impact wasn't in the speeches or the headlines. It was in the quiet moments, when a child walked through the doors of a center for the first time, scared and uncertain, but leaving a few weeks later with the courage to dream. It was in every life changed, every story rewritten. And as Rohan watched Aman, now leading the foundation with pride, he knew that the cycle would continue. They had given the world a second chance, and now the world was giving it back. Rohan stood at the edge of the bridge one last time, looking out over the city. He had come full circle. He had been the boy who had nothing, the man who had built something from nothing, and now he was witnessing the future unfold in front of him. As the years stretched on, the Mir Aman Foundation reached heights Rohan could never have dreamed of in his most hopeful moments under that bridge. It wasn't just the programs that flourished, it was the philosophy behind them, one that spread across borders and cultures. People saw the value in second chances, not as charity, but as a necessity. Communities were rising up, inspired to create opportunities where there had once been despair. Rohan, now in his 50s, still played a vital role, though in a more quiet, reflective way. He traveled often, meeting with other global leaders, championing the idea that systemic change began with individual empowerment. But he also returned home, to the heart of the foundation, where it all began. Aman, who had grown into a brilliant and compassionate leader, continued to innovate and challenge norms. The foundation now partnered with governments and corporations to implement long-term change. They weren't just providing shelter or education, they were fostering an entire ecosystem that encouraged sustainability and independence. One day, after returning from a long trip abroad, Rohan found himself walking through the newly expanded center. As he passed the walls lined with photos of children who had passed through the foundation's doors, some of whom had gone on to college, some starting their own businesses, and others mentoring the younger generation, he couldn't help but feel a deep, overwhelming sense of fulfillment. Rohan sat on a bench outside, watching a group of young kids run across the yard, playing soccer. It was in these moments that he truly felt the impact of his journey, not in awards or recognition, but in the smiles of children who would never know the hardships he had once faced. Aman joined him shortly after, carrying a stack of papers. He sat down beside Rohan, quiet for a moment, before nudging him. "You know, I used to think I wanted to change the world," Aman said, staring out at the kids. "But what I've realized is, it's about changing one life at a time. And in doing that, you change the world." Rohan looked over at him, pride swelling in his chest. "That's exactly what I thought when I first started." Aman smiled. "It's your legacy. You showed me that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the children's laughter filling the air. Rohan thought about everything they had built together. He thought about the boy under the bridge who had dreamed of something better, and how that dream had now taken root in hundreds of other hearts. A few moments later, Aman stood up and stretched. "I've got a meeting in an hour. You coming?" Rohan smiled, a peaceful sense of satisfaction filling him. "I'll be there. Just give me a few more minutes." As Aman walked away, Rohan glanced once more at the kids, some playing, some sitting together, sharing stories. This was his real legacy, not the programs or the buildings, but the children who now had the chance to dream, to live, and to change the world in their own ways. The story would never really end. There would always be new children to help, new lives to touch. But Rohan knew that the foundation he and Aman had created would continue to echo across time, a force for good that would never fade. He had taken the risk. He had believed in a future when no one else would. And now, that belief was living, breathing, and growing, with the power to touch generations to come. And for Rohan, that was enough. In the years following Rohan's quiet departure from the active leadership of the foundation, his name became synonymous with transformation, resilience, and hope. His legacy lived on not just through the countless success stories of individuals who had been empowered by the foundation, but in the enduring spirit of the movement he had started. Meera, the young girl Rohan had mentored in his later years, rose to prominence as a key figure within the foundation. Under her leadership, the foundation's reach expanded even further, offering innovative programs for mental health support, job training, and leadership development. Her passion for social change grew stronger with each passing year, fueled by the memory of the man who had once believed in her when she had nothing. One day, as Meera sat at her desk, looking at the blueprint for a new initiative aimed at integrating technology with education for disadvantaged children, she paused. There was a deep sense of gratitude in her heart. Rohan had believed in her from the start, and now she was living the dream he had shown her, not just to survive, but to thrive, and to pass that gift on to others. As part of the annual event celebrating the foundation's achievements, Meera stood at the podium, addressing the crowd of new graduates and young leaders who had emerged from their programs. Behind her, a large screen displayed an image of Rohan smiling, standing in front of the original center he had built years ago. It was a tribute to the man who had started it all, the man who had transformed his own pain into the foundation for a better future. Rohan once said that every person deserves the chance to be more than their circumstances, Meera began, her voice strong, yet filled with emotion. That belief has shaped everything we do here at the Foundation. As the years passed, the Foundation continued to evolve and adapt to the changing needs of the world. It wasn't just about offering resources anymore, it was about equipping communities to sustain themselves. The Foundation began empowering local leaders, teaching them how to run initiatives that could be self-sustaining. It became a global network of support, reaching far beyond the boundaries of one city or one country. What had started as a simple mission to help those on the margins had now become an international effort to address systemic inequality, to empower the voiceless, and to fight for justice in every corner of the globe. The Foundation was involved in climate action, economic equality, and advocating for the rights of the disenfranchised, building bridges between countries and cultures, working toward a vision of a truly inclusive world. One day, a special visitor came to the Foundation's headquarters, an elderly woman from a small village in India, who had once been a part of the original programs when Rohan had first begun his work. She had come to express her gratitude for what the Foundation had done for her life. "I'm a doctor now," she told Meera. "And I have just opened a clinic in my village, because I want to give back to the community that raised me. I never would have been able to do this without Rohan's help. Without his vision, I would still be lost." Meera's eyes welled up with tears. This was the beauty of the work they did, transforming not just individual lives, but entire communities. The ripple effect of Rohan's vision was still spreading, generations later. And as each new wave of young people came through the Foundation's doors, it became clear, Rohan's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to all of them.